All right. So get settled in, get somewhere comfy that you can breathe. If you have any questions right off the bat, feel free to stick them in the chat. Tell me, for those of you who are logging on, where you are logging in from. I am in sunny San Diego. It is very warm here today in the area of San Diego we're in. Okay, got the YouTube set up, good to go. Let me get my screen set up here. One more moment and we'll get started, but I also wanted to give people a couple minutes to get logged on and get situated. All right, so welcome everybody. Arizona, I bet it is even warmer there than it is here, I would imagine. Carlsbad, nice, just north of here. Hopefully sunny up there. I'm a little bit east San Diego. Microclimates is a real thing here. It's usually sunny here, and then by the time I drive home to the beach, it's at this time of year pretty socked in, which for me, if I go for a run later, I actually prefer it to be a little bit cool. Also in Paradise, we won't tell the Arizona folks about Paradise. Don't want to make them feel bad, but it is amazing over here on the West Coast. So for all of you, wherever you're joining me from, thank you for joining. And for those who are doing our 21-day mindfulness challenge, I'm excited for you guys to get started on that journey. And this is just another talk that once again goes alongside that same topic. So for those of you who watch this later on, still a great thing to be aware of, whether you deal with pelvic floor issues or back pain or not. You know, having a place to be able to send friends who maybe talk about their pain or things like that. You can say, ha, I know people who can help with that. So I'm Dr. Megan Graff with Movement RX. I'm so excited to be able to talk about this topic with you guys. Obviously, we got our foundation as a strength oriented physical therapy company, working a lot with CrossFit and weightlifting athletes specifically. I work a lot with runners as well, kind of doing everything. I really enjoy strength training and running myself. And something that I realized, there's a big knowledge gap, both with athletes and clients that we work with, but even for myself as a PT, of how important the pelvic floor and breathing is for the everyday things that we do and how it plays into pain that we have. So we're going to talk about that connection, what you should be aware of, even if you, like I said, don't necessarily feel like you have pelvic floor issues, or if you know you do, this talk is definitely for you. But if you've ever dealt with back pain, especially kind of nagging chronic back pain, your breathing can be responsible for that. But if you do have any problems with your pelvic floor, such as leaking, whether that's when you sneeze, you leak a little bit, or when you try to run or jump, problems with constipation also can relate to breathing in the pelvic floor, pain in your pelvic floor, or painful sex, difficulty enjoying sex. Breathing could be the blame. We don't think about these things. And it's so important to talk to and normalize and know that it's okay to talk to your provider about it. If you feel like something's not right, it probably isn't. Unfortunately, some of the common things that I hear when it comes to people's pelvic health, of just what's normal is not, it's not normal. You know, it's not normal to pee yourself after you have a kid. And so let's talk about what to do if that is the case, and how just the way that you breathe and manage pressure is really important for that. So as I'm talking, if you guys have any questions that come up, you can put them in the chat. I only have Zoom up right now, but I'll check YouTube at the end. So if anybody happens to be watching this live on YouTube, still put your questions in the chat. I will get to all of them at the end. You can, for those of you on Zoom, either choose to use the Q&A feature, which you can submit anonymously if you want, or in the chat, there is the option. You'll notice you can select panelists. That will come just to me, or you can select panelists and attendees if you want everybody to be able to see the question. So totally up to you if you want to submit anonymously or just privately to me. Either way, I will get to all of those at the end. So if you have questions that come up as we go, put them in there. Don't worry, I won't forget about you. So where we're going to start with this is talking about posture. So for those of you who have been with us at Movement RX for a while, you know we talk about this. But you know, everybody's posture is a little bit different, and not everyone is going to be able to get to what we consider ideal or normal, whatever normal even is. Everybody's different, but there's things that we can do to try to maximize how well our diaphragm is able to move. So I'm gonna pan over here to Skelly. His posture is definitely less than ideal. But I just want to kind of sort of talk about his rib cage without him falling apart. We move our little movie set here. But when we talk about the diaphragm and what that actually is, it's a big muscle basically that sits all along the bottom of the rib cage. He has a very smushed rib cage over here, so I can't even get my hand there. So we got to work on some mobility with Skelly here. But it's this big flat sheet of muscle that goes right across the bottom of your rib cage. And then if we think about kind of the core, it forms that kind of upper part of the core. And then you have your ab muscles that come all the way around. You have your back muscles in the back, and supported on the bottom is your pelvic floor. And so it creates, we have this pressure canister in the middle with that. And so if we have posture like this, that inherently changes the space and the pressure I have in this canister, which is going to affect my lower back positioning, all the muscles. Once I'm a little bit squished here, that's going to affect how the muscles in my back and my abs and my pelvic floor are all sitting. So we want to try to work on posture. Like I said, not everybody is going to be able to get to, like, here, I'm walking around and this is my posture. But there's things that we can do to try to improve what we do have, to try to get our body a little bit more stacked, the way the spine kind of works best mechanically with the diaphragm. And so, like I said, that best or that ideal is going to be different for every body, but we'll talk about how to kind of work towards a little bit better stacked alignment. But to really maximize breathing efficiently, and we'll talk about breathing mechanics in a second, we need to set our rib cage up for success. So again, if I'm smushed down here, I definitely don't have a lot of room for expansion when it comes to that big flat sheet of muscle, that diaphragm, to be able to really expand down and out. If I'm already kind of crunched down, there's nowhere for it to go. And the other thing that we tend to see when it comes to posture is, you know, the lower back is kind of tilted backwards, and then the rib cage is flared out. Here, the diaphragm is actually a little bit more on a stretch, even at rest. And so it's still not able to move through its full range of motion as ideally as we would want it to. So these are all things that we want to see. Are we in this kind of like lazy posture hanging out this way where our butt is kicked back and then rib cage is kind of flared out? Or am I more in this still kind of what I call it energy efficient posture, where our muscles don't have to work as hard? So my thoracic spine is a little bit rounded. My hips are maybe a little bit shoved forward. A lot of times I'll even see like this too. It seems like I'm exaggerating, but that is a very common posture for people to be hanging out in, especially if you're holding a kid on your hip or you're carrying things. This is kind of the easy place to be. And so learning where your alignment is. I had one of my kind of coaching mentors that I really look up to, and what she teaches about, Brianna Battles. She told her husband to take pictures of her posture when she wasn't looking. You realize just how terrible you end up looking a lot of the time throughout the day, but it makes you a little more aware of, how am I actually picking this thing up off the ground? If I'm standing around talking to somebody, what am I doing with my posture? You know, when you think about it, you know you're in a good position. But when you're not thinking about it, those are the times that you maybe spend a lot of time there, and that's what can create pain. So when it comes to your posture, what can be helpful, if you happen to have a mirror near you, even right now, just stand up, turn to the side, and take a look. So ideally, you want to be able to see yourself, at the very least, from ear kind of down to all the way down to your feet. But even if you're just here, just being able to see where your pelvis and rib cage are, what your shoulders are doing. So ideally, if you can have somebody take a picture of you from the side, that is more helpful. So that way you can see where your head alignment is. But even just here, you can get an idea of, are my shoulders maybe sitting a little bit forward? Is my upper back a little bit rounded? Which way is my pelvis tilted? Do I feel and look like I'm actually pretty stacked? So getting an idea of where you are. If you don't have a mirror, another thing you can do is go up against a wall. So try to get your heels, hips, and shoulders and head touching the wall. So for me, my ponytail is a little bit in the way. So if I get, and don't worry about your lower back is not necessarily going to touch the wall, but heels, hips, you should be able to get shoulders back, but also notice if when you do that gentle shoulder blade squeeze back, does your rib cage come out? So it might be helpful to put your hands on the bottom part of your rib cage. And then when you try to gently squeeze those shoulders down and back, do you feel like I'm exaggerating here, but do you feel like your ribs just slightly kind of come up and out? Are you able to keep them down as you gently pull your shoulders down and back? And then trying to do just a slight little chin tuck to get your head towards the wall. So one, obviously that in and of itself is a bit of an exercise to get there. I'm gonna get Skelly's sad frame out of here. I feel like he's like right there. He just wants to lean in. So one, just stand with your heels and hips up against the wall and kind of get a feel for where you naturally are. So if I'm not trying, my shoulders sit about an inch or two in front of the wall. And my head's a little bit forward, but I'm pretty comfortable here. To get my shoulders back, it's not a huge difference, but I do have to kind of force it to get my head back a little bit. So for some of you, you might find when you gently squeeze the shoulders back, maybe your head is still a little bit forward, and to try to touch your head to the wall, you actually end up extending. So if you were to keep your eyeballs fixed in your head, then what would happen is you end up looking up towards the ceiling. So if you're able to tuck back, you should be able to stay looking straight forward. But if you end up looking up, that means your neck is having to extend. So one, that can be used as a posture test of just checking in. One, maybe when we get off this webinar, take a picture of yourself from the side and see what your posture looks like. Where is your head in alignment with your body? Is your upper body over your lower body? Or you kind of lean back or lean forward? And just looking at that alignment, and what can you do to try to get a little more stacked? So then the wall drill can be really helpful to learn what that is. Same thing, it may be useful to have a mirror that you can watch yourself if you're up against the wall, making sure you're not flaring that rib cage out to try to get the shoulders back. So it's just a gentle squeeze back, little engagement of the abs to pull the rib cage down. And depending on how tight you are, this might feel really challenging. It's not to say don't do it, but you also don't need to force it to where you're holding your breath. So get as much as you can, just gentle squeeze back, little engagement of the abs so you feel just a teeny tiny bit of tension here, but then try to take a breath in. So notice as I did that, I had some expansion here, a little bit upwards, but it shouldn't be, okay, I have that little bit of tension and my shoulders are back. And so when I take my breath in, it all comes up here. So if you felt yourself come up and shrug up, that's where we get into now breathing mechanics. So when we talk about breathing mechanics, for those of you who have done some of our webinars before, you may be familiar with this drill of putting a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly and just take a normal breath in. So again, when you take that breath in, one, what do you feel move first, the hand on your chest or the hand on your belly? So for me, it's a little simultaneous, if anything, a little bit, just a hair before I feel the hand on my belly move first. I've practiced this a lot. So now I want you to put your hands on either side of your rib cage. If it's more comfortable for your thumbs, you can have everything kind of wrapped around here, or if you want to have your thumbs back, whatever is comfortable. Main thing is hands kind of on that lower part of your rib cage. So on Skelly, these kind of bottom ones here. So you should feel just a little bit of bone under your hand. And again, take a normal breath in. Do you feel any movement at your hand? Do you just feel them, maybe your fingers in the front kind of moving forward? Go ahead and put in the chat. Tell me if on this movement, well, actually, let's come back. When you did this one, which hand did you feel move first? So tell me if it was chest or belly. And then do you feel any movement in this lower part of the rib cage as you take a breath in? So kind of testing yourself on mobility. And then also, what are you feeling? Do you get any discomfort with this as you do it? So now with this, I'm going to have you take another normal breath in and just kind of tune into your pelvic floor. Yes, think of your nether region, lady or man bits, and just take a normal breath. Do you feel anything happen? A lot of times with a regular breath, you don't necessarily feel anything happen at the pelvic floor. But what I want you to do now is take another big breath in, as big of an inhale as you can, but check in with your pelvic floor. What do you feel happening? So do that a couple of times, tune in with that region, and what do you feel happen? Do you feel any movement? Do you feel like it kind of tightens as you take a breath in? Or do you feel it descend or relax down? So once again, we're trying to do a little diagnostic test on our body. What are we actually feeling when we do these things? What does your body do all the way through that pressure canister as you take a big breath in? And the other thing too that I want you guys to watch out for as you take your breath in, or just notice if you do it, do you take a big breath? Let me see if I can do it. Take a big breath in, and as you do that, your stomach actually sucks in, and then you kind of come up. So noticing if you do that too, because that is a breathing pattern I've sometimes seen. Of to take that big breath in, the stomach kind of sucks in, the ribs maybe come out a little bit, and definitely shoulders come up. So if that's something you do too, definitely let me know. We'll talk about that as well. So for some of you, you did put in the chat, yes. So especially if you've had kids, if you've been pregnant, that is a very, very common breathing pattern, because in late pregnancy, baby has taken up all that space that you need for good deep breathing. And so you learn your body just kind of inherently to be able to take a good breath or a big breath in, starts to do that, what we call paradoxical breathing, where you kind of suck in and your rib cage comes out, because that's, again, late at the end of pregnancy, that's where you have room to move to be able to take a big breath. But then even once baby comes out in postpartum, those mechanics tend to stay. So we'll talk about, we'll get into fixing that or changing that to allow the diaphragm to move a little more normally. So when we talk about normal breathing mechanics, the diaphragm, when you take a breath in, it contracts and comes down. And so your pelvic floor does the same movement. So you breathe in, your diaphragm comes down, and your pelvic floor slightly relaxes as well. So you should feel that similar kind of movement. It's very subtle at the pelvic floor. Obviously, you're not getting that big excursion that I'm showing, but you should feel that slight descending when you take a big breath in. If you feel no movement or you feel it tighten up, that's a good indication that your pelvic floor muscles probably need to learn to relax a little bit better. And a lot of times people think like, oh, if I have problems with leakage, then it means I need to strengthen my pelvic floor. Well, sometimes it's more of an issue of it doesn't relax properly. And so it's not able to take load of a sneeze or running or jumping. Definitely if you deal with pain or constipation, a lot of that has to do with pelvic floor tightness. So learning how to use your breath to properly relax that is really important. And so then also when we talk about rib cage mobility and mechanics, being able to really breathe into the lower rib cage is very important. So to give that diaphragm all the room it needs to descend and get, the best chance for a big breath in, it's not just a belly breath where you take a breath in and I expand forward. You want to think more umbrella breathing or 360-degree expansion. So through that lower rib cage, if you're able to kind of wrap your hands around someone, even if you're just kind of on the sides of your body, but to where you have your thumbs maybe hooked a little bit more towards the back of your ribs and your fingers are a little more towards the front. And then obviously you have that C grip on either side. As you take a big breath in, try to think about expanding into all of those spaces. So I'm expanding into my fingers in the front, definitely into my C grips in the side, and then even trying to breathe into my back fingers. So you want that expansion in all directions. If you feel like you are tight in one direction, so say you're trying to do this and you're like, yeah, I feel a lot of like belly motion and I'm moving forward, but I'm not moving out to the sides, or maybe you're only feeling a lot of flaring out to the side and not really any expansion front or back, there's different ways you can work on that. So one, laying down on your side is a great way to work on expanding into one side of your body. So this hand can be kind of relaxing. So if I'm laying down on my left side and taking a big breath in, that wasn't a good example because I shrugged up. So take a big breath in and really try to expand into that hand. It's helpful to have the opposite hand almost providing like a little bit of a counter pressure. So you can try to breathe into that gentle resistance. And then as you exhale, almost exaggerating. So again, if I'm actually laying down, exhale, I'm not, crunching my side body, but trying to, as much as I can, pull that rib cage down. Obviously, you can do that sitting up and trying to push down on the rib cage, but making sure that you're getting just as much expansion as you're getting, also being able to really get that recoil mobility. Because that's the other thing we see too. Sometimes the rib cage can even get a little bit stuck outwards. And so you're not getting the good full mobility that the ribs are supposed to get. So as much as you should be able to expand out to the sides, as you exhale, you can kind of use your hand to gently also push down and in to get the rib cage down and in as well. But with that 360-degree breathing, so we talked about exercises to work on the lateral mobility. So how do we breathe into the back? That's usually one where people are like, I don't feel anything back there. So a couple different positions that's really great to work on is child's pose stretch. So being down on the ground. Hopefully I don't blend in too much with the floor back here. That's why I try to wear colors other than something dark. So child's pose stretch, just getting down to where you feel you're kind of crunched into this little ball position to where if I take a big belly breath in, my belly runs into my thighs. And so it really gives your ribs a chance to try to expand backwards into any tension you have. So taking a big breath in, you feel just a slight stretch into the back. If you feel like your shoulders are really tight in this position, if anything, bring your shoulders down, or you can do child's pose this way. Take that big breath in, try to really breathe into your back body, and then exhale, sink a little bit deeper into it. The other really great one is if you have some kind of you can either use, I have a door right here, if you have a sturdy door, to be able to squat down and actually put your feet together. Once again, you have your thighs blocking the front of your body. Take that big breath in, and it forces a little bit more expansion into the back body. Those are two of my favorite ones to work on that backwards expansion, because that is a lot of times where we're very tight. I would say the more common posture that I tend to see is this kind of hanging out here. So then the rib cage is a little bit flared out, and then we're really crunched down and tight, and the muscles in the back are tight. And so by our posture being that way, it also impacts our breathing mechanics and just how we're even able to breathe into our rib cage. So one, like we talked about, step one, getting our posture in a little bit better alignment, and then just working on mobility in that position. So whether it's doing some soft tissue work with a foam roller, rolling on the muscles of the back, or using a lacrosse ball or peanut to relieve some muscle tension in the back. But then those two exercises, either the laying down child's pose one, or I personally really like that squat stretch, to really sit down into it. Just take your deep breaths. And as you do it, I'm still getting a little bit of expansion in the front, but if my thighs are here and I don't have much room to move, it really forces me to take a breath into my back, and it feels really nice, especially because I know I have a lot of tension there. So doing that breathing exercise really helps with that 360-degree expansion. And then obviously, if you're just also not feeling much lower rib cage mobility, even laying down on your back as you take that breath in, focus on kind of up and out at the rib cage. Then going a little bit bigger, feeling the expansion into the lateral ribs, and then another little inhale. So almost breaking it up into the parts, if that helps you with focusing on the lower rib cage expansion. So if anything, taking more shallow breaths. So you can do this laying down on your back, knees bent up is usually a very comfortable position. So doing a small shallow breath here. And for those who felt like you take that breath inward and your belly sucks in, try to think about leaving your abs nice and relaxed. So work on this laying down. So what I want you to do is actually kind of think about just gently pressing your belly out as you take a small breath in. And as you do that too, if anything, maybe have your kind of palms splayed across your belly, but have your thumbs on your lower rib cage. So as you take that breath in, try to just slightly breathe into your fingers. And then on that next small part of the inhale, breathe into the thumbs. And then from there, lateral ribs. And that last little part of that big breath in, breathe slightly into the back body. It's almost like breaking it up into pieces of where do I maybe feel like my disconnect is, of where I have trouble expanding. Like, oh yeah, I can get my ribs to go outward, no problem. But actually I'm not feeling a whole lot of motion in front, and it's not going to be huge, but you should feel a little bit of motion through your hands, both in the front and the back. So obviously it's hard to feel in the back when you're laying down. So it's helpful to test this in sitting and standing, and you might find a difference in how well your ribs move depending on the position that you're in. But then when it comes to training it, sometimes it can be really helpful to do them laying down, because it takes all the other distractions of our body being upright and posture and stuff like that out of it. So those are kind of the big things there. And then, like I said, just as important as being able to expand outward is how is that recoil? So take your big breath in and then try to get all the air out on your exhale. Do you feel like you get much of a difference in that mobility? Or does it kind of feel like, okay, I took my big breath in and it's kind of right in the same spot? So getting an idea for, are you just not getting a lot of movement out, or does it feel really stiff coming in? At the end of the day, it's important to work on both. A way to know if, I guess I should say, if the expansion part is more stiff on you versus the recoil, it may be helpful to, it's kind of hard to do it on yourself, but maybe looking in the mirror. So you have that bottom angle of your rib cage here. So Skelly is a great example of somebody I would probably want to work on the recoil with. Because if we look at that angle, it's hard with my hand that way, but this angle, he's kind of over 90 degrees, and everybody is going to be different. But this is generally a width that I would maybe want to work on his recoil a little bit to decrease that angle slightly. Because when the ribs sit really wide like that, it can also impact how the abs are able to function. So if you struggle with back pain, once again, depending on how well the ribs move, it changes how well the abs can contract. And then that impacts your back and pelvic floor. So if you look in the mirror, so for me, I tend to be a little bit narrow, but you may kind of be able to see I have a little bit of a difference on each side. This side is a little more narrow, and this side sits out a little bit wide. It's not necessarily good or bad. Ultimately, our organs are different on each side, so it's actually normal to have a little bit of a difference. But if it's a big difference, and I know for me, my left lower back tends to feel really tight. So the fact that this side is maybe a little bit stuck in is something I might want to work on. It's not to say I have to get my ribs matching exactly here, but it's something to try, knowing that I tend to feel a lot of tightness here. And it looks like I'm a little restricted here in the front of my rib cage, just based on this angle. It's something to consider for me to then work on. Okay, let me work on my lateral expansion here, laying on my right side, breathing into my left side body, doing a little bit more of the sitting down and back into my into that squat stretch, and breathing into my back body, even doing a slight shift as I'm hanging onto the door to really exaggerate breathing into my back side body there, and addressing that. So if you're not able to do it right now, maybe take a look in the mirror at some point, kind of either hooking your fingers under here, see, does it look like you're much less than 90 degrees? Or are you much wider than 90 degrees? Do you have a big difference side to side? And it's something to play around with. If your rib cage tends to sit a little bit wider, focusing more on the mobility and the recoil. And then if you sit really narrow, really trying to focus on that expansion. So all of these things in addressing that rib mobility and how well you're breathing, like I said, really helps address lower back tightness and pelvic floor issues. So with this, I'm going to get into questions here in a little bit. But about any of those exercises, do you guys have any questions? So just number one thing to work on is starting with a laying down breathing drill. But if you weren't able to do it kind of along with me, testing out your posture first, whether that's set up your little selfie camera, self timer, run, get yourself, okay, this is my normal posture, see what you look like. And then try little adjustments. If you're able to do it in a mirror, great. So you get that kind of real-time feedback. Or if you notice like, oh no, I think my posture is pretty good, but then you have a picture and you're actually a little bit like this. Well, okay, so it looked like my shoulders were a little bit forward, my head was a little bit forward. Okay, let me do a little squeeze. Let me try to get myself into a good posture. Okay, let me take my picture again. Like, it seems really goofy. Maybe do this at home when someone's not around, or if somebody is home, have them take the pictures for you. But it's ways to learn what feels comfortable for where your body is in space. So you definitely don't want to overdo it and be walking around like a robot, really stiff. But it's the difference of, am I just being kind of lazy here and this is what's easy, versus just a slight, pull back of the shoulders, my head's in line, but I'm not, really tense. When we talk about posture, especially, you want to think about what we call tension to task. So I'm not really tight and rigid here to get there. It's try to get more relaxed. So if you're trying, say your back is really flexed forward, and you're trying to get more upright and you feel like everything is really tensing up to do it, it's too much for where your body is right now, and that's okay. Just get to where you can. If you're really flexed forward, can you just come out of it a little bit? And then working on thoracic mobility drills, which is a whole other thing. But if you join our daily RXs, we've done a lot of thoracic drills. So in your member area, you should be able to search old ones to get some ideas of ways to help open up the upper back, loosen the pecs in the front, because these muscles tend to be really tight and pull the shoulders forward. So finding that balance of working on the thoracic spine, the upper back, to really help us get into a better position posturally, but then doing the soft tissue work of the muscles in the front. If these muscles are really tight on you and tend to pull you kind of down and back, working on soft tissue in the lower back to make it a little easier for those to expand a little bit. If you feel like your rib cage is really narrow and you have a hard time taking a good breath in, maybe doing some what we call gut smashing, literally just like laying on a ball and trying, like a larger ball, and trying to take big breaths in to release a little bit, whether it's even doing just some self mobility of, I'm going to hold a little pressure into my ab and try to take a breath into it. and then relax. Getting creative with working on these muscles. And that's where, we have our open Q&A sessions that we can go through more of this stuff if you have specific questions about it. But ultimately, if something feels tight, mobilize it to help you get into a better position. And then once you've worked on the mobility to be able to get into a good position, then we work on the mechanics. So like I mentioned, it becomes a pattern, kind of our norm. Say if you have that paradoxical breathing where you suck in and the rib cage comes out, that's just a habit basically that developed. So learning how to, okay, let me get that little bit of expansion into my hands and belly, and then in front of my rib cage, then to the lateral rib cage and back. And ultimately we want to be able to kind of do that all together. But I think breaking it up into pieces, if that's something that feels very foreign to you, is helpful, of like, okay, front, side, back, and then trying to make it a little more of a seamless, you expand all directions. And then, especially for that back body, the child's pose stretch or the squat stretch. So doing those, but addressing some of these breathing things, going through the mindfulness and meditation seminar is really helpful when it comes to bringing your awareness to your breath. Am I really tensing up and just breathing through here? So it's feeding into tension in my neck and shoulders down to my back. Am I holding my breath to do different movements that ultimately puts a lot of pressure on the pelvic floor? And then if you're just not getting proper expansion and you don't have good mobility through the ribs or the thoracic spine, that tends to put a lot of strain on the lower back. So improving your breathing and improving your breathing mechanics goes a long way for relieving, especially like kind of chronic lower back strains and tension, and just that general, like, we tend to feel really achy if you've been sitting for a long time, things like that. Addressing and using your breathing to feel better, and to also work on pelvic floor relaxation, every now and then. Once you feel like you've kind of got the mechanics up here down, then tuning into your pelvic floor. Okay, as I take that big breath in, do I feel some relaxation down? Those are obviously a little bit more challenging. I've done another webinar on pelvic floor and working on contractions versus relaxations. So be sure to go back and search our YouTubes and the YouTube videos, and in the member area, it should be in there as well. If you want more specifics on pelvic floor, kind of learning how to contract and relax. So let me switch my screen around here so I can see the chats a little bit easier. So again, if you have any questions, I have about 7 minutes. I'm going to get through some of these. I know some of them were kind of comments along the way. Good. So I did see some of these. Belly first, good. So chest first, only a little on the side. So those breathing drills will be really great for you to work on, getting a little less movement here. It's not to say you shouldn't move. Absolutely, when you're taking big breaths in, you'll feel the rib cage expand up here. It shouldn't be the only and the biggest movement you feel as you take a breath in. So try to focus on the expansion all around in the lower rib cage. And this is the last little bit. And ultimately, really just when you're exerting yourself is when you'll feel more of these kind of neck and shoulder accessory muscles working. So say you're doing like a sprint workout and you're going really hard, everything's going to be kicking in to help you take a big breath in. That being said, it shouldn't be all primarily here. I get a lot of runners that come in and are like, my neck and shoulders are really sore after I've done a hard workout, and it's because they're much here. That area should be working when you take a big breath in, but it's not number one. And then number two is lower down. So you want to focus on that expansion lower down. Perfect. Supported child's pose would do the same, right? Yes, absolutely. So whatever, if you need different types of pillows or props to help you get into child's pose more comfortably, that's absolutely fine. Say you maybe need a pillow between your heels and your butt, or even a pillow at your belly will do the trick too, because also that's providing that pressure against it if you're laying on your stomach. Depending on how your knees feel, if you're able to do that squat stretch, great. Is there a way to test whether an individual's constipation is caused by a dysfunctional pelvic floor as opposed to something else? That's a good question. So yes, there is. It's as far as a self-test, it can be challenging. I would say, that's kind of an in-depth talk that is a good thing that I can talk about and maybe get with Chef Nikki about when it comes to nutrition and how that relates to constipation problems. But one, just checking in with what are your mechanics when you try to have a bowel movement? Do you hold your breath and bear down as you try to go? That may be impacting how easily the pelvic floor is able to relax versus using your breath, taking a breath in and actually, potentially using your exhale as you do a gentle relax or push down rather than a bear down and push using your breathing. Or if you want to try the inhale, because again, the pelvic floor slightly relaxes as you gently push. So playing around with the mechanics and using your breath as you try to go to the bathroom can be helpful to see, does that make a difference in how easily you're able to have a bowel movement? Obviously too, checking in with the consistency of your bowel movements. Like if you're, having larger, firmer bowel movements, it's going to be harder. So that's where obviously nutrition is really key. Nutrition and hydration is really key. And that's where pelvic floor therapy for women and men, when it comes to gut health and bowel issues, a lot of it comes down to education of like, what are all the pieces that come to that are impacting whatever issue you might be having, whether it's urinary incontinence and having leakage, or fecal incontinence and maybe even leakage or constipation. When it comes to those types of issues, they're very common, and we're always so afraid to talk about these things, but it's so important and it plays such a big role in our quality of life. So if it's something that you can address through pelvic floor physical therapy and through some education and just changing daily habits, that goes such a long way. So yeah, potentially through a consultation, even, try those couple of things of playing around with your breathing a little bit while you try to go, maybe checking on nutrition and hydration. Are there ways that you can change what you're eating, maybe a little more fiber to make bowel movements a little bit easier, factors like that? Checking in about that. And if you're like, I still, I've been doing those things and I'm still having problems, then checking in with a pelvic floor physical therapist. So we can do online sessions, and obviously it would be more about the education piece, making sure that you are feeling like you're able to properly relax your pelvic floor and going through exercises in ways that you can learn to do that on your own at home. And then ultimately, if you need to see somebody in person for it, they can do an actual internal assessment that would determine, are you truly relaxing your muscles the way that you're supposed to? Do you have a lot of muscle tension? Are there manual techniques, like hands-on techniques, that can help improve the tone of the pelvic floor? Meaning, how tight are those muscles? Are they just so tight and restricted that when they need to be able to relax to allow you to pass the bowel movement, that they are actually doing that? So usually that can be addressed through education about how you're trying to go to the bathroom, which seems so silly. Like, it's a natural thing that we do, but we also manage to learn bad habits along the way. So teasing that out, is that a little bit of the problem? And then again, nutrition and hydration. So that's a really, really great question. Let me check YouTube for any questions. Otherwise, we will be signing off. So thank you all so much for joining me. I'm really excited to be able to talk about these topics a little bit more, because again, they seem so like we should know these things. We do these things every day, and either that or we're just embarrassed to talk about them. But everybody poops. Everybody has a pelvic floor. So these things need to be a little bit more normalized to be able to talk about. Obviously, I don't expect us to all get into a group chat and we all talk about our pelvic floor problems, but ultimately feeling comfortable bringing it to your provider, kind of learning what's normal and maybe what could I actually be better at. You don't have to live life and forever have problems with leaking or constipation. Like, there's things that can be done. It's just a matter of figuring out what's going to be the best intervention for you. But part of these webinars, the great part about it is just teaching you some tips and tricks that can hopefully help improve any symptoms that you have, but start guiding you on a path to, okay, maybe I need a little bit more. And then, feeling more comfortable checking in with somebody one-on-one, whether us through telehealth or your medical doctor about any issues you might be having. But at the very least, you have more tools in your toolbox to be a better functioning, better feeling human being, and just how you're breathing, being more aware of how you're doing things, how you're holding yourself. It makes such a difference in how you feel every day too. So thank you all for joining me. And I'm so excited for those of you who are on the 21-day mindfulness challenge. If you're not signed up, we have another round starting in about 6 weeks. So be sure to check out our website so that way you can get signed up or signed up on the list to get started on that one if you're not already in it. So thank you all again for joining me, and I will see you all around on all the other webinars. Have a great day, everyone.